They promised to pick him up on Sunday. He waited at the gate for 7 Sundays in a row, and then he stopped counting. Chris Miller was 10 when the car pulled away. A quiet boy with wide eyes and a hand-me-down backpack. He stood at the entrance of Brookage Academy, a prestigious boarding school nestled in the misty woods of Vermont. His parents had hugged him, told him they were proud, whispered that they would be back before he even missed them. But Sunday came and went. No car, no parents, no explanation. The staff offered excuses. Maybe they were delayed, maybe they called, but Chris never received a phone call. He sat by the gate, clutching a worn-out teddy bear, the only comfort he had from home. A week turned into 2, then 3. He began to understand. This wasn't an accident, it was a decision. That fall, while other boys were picked up for weekend visits, Chris stayed behind. He started spending nights in the art room, sketching with broken crayons, building cardboard sets from leftover supplies. He never spoke of his family. He stopped asking questions. He stopped hoping. By the time he turned 16, Chris had cycled through 3 foster homes during school breaks, each one temporary, each one reminding him he didn't quite belong. But he held on to one thing: the stage. In the school theater, under dusty lights and velvet curtains, he found silence that didn't hurt. He started designing backdrops, organizing props, painting stories he couldn't speak aloud. He never used his last name. Not really. He became Chris, just Chris. And when he applied for college scholarships, he left the parental contact fields blank. He got in anyway, a full ride to a design program in New York, awarded not for who raised him, but for what he built alone. Years passed. The boy forgotten at the gate became a man of quiet elegance. Chris moved through the world with calm precision. His name began appearing in playbills and theater reviews, not as an actor, but as the man behind the scenes, the one who made magic with light and shadow. In the middle of that rise, he met Marcus, a soft-voiced director with thoughtful eyes and an instinct for stories that needed to be told. They met backstage after a small production in Brooklyn. Marcus had admired the set design. Chris barely looked up when they shook hands. But when Marcus said, "Your work speaks even when you don't," Chris paused. That was the beginning. Over time, Marcus became the one person who asked about the years Chris never spoke of. But he didn't push. He simply waited, the way someone does when they sense there's a storm buried under still water. Chris never mentioned Brookage, never said the word parents. He had erased that chapter. Or so he thought. Because 10 weeks before their wedding, he stood at the edge of a stationery shop in the East Village, holding a silver envelope in his hand. Not one of the custom invites, just a plain one. Inside was a single card, hand-lettered. It didn't say mom or dad. It read, "For those who left me at the gate," and in the return address line. He wrote nothing, just a location. The old house, the one he still remembered from childhood, even if they had moved away long ago. He sealed the envelope slowly, pressing the flap down with his thumb, as if locking away every unanswered question inside. Then he dropped it in the mailbox. Not because he needed them, but because they needed to know. He no longer waited at that gate. If this story moves something in you, if you've ever had to rebuild yourself from what others left behind, please subscribe to Heartstorie. Your story matters, and you're not alone. There were no fireworks, no camera crews, no elaborate performances. When Chris proposed to Marcus, it was quiet, just the two of them, standing under a canopy of string lights behind their apartment in Brooklyn. He held out the ring with steady hands, his voice softer than usual. It was a simple band, etched on the inside with 3 words. Someone came back. Marcus didn't ask what it meant. He simply said yes, eyes shining, as if he already understood. Planning the wedding felt strangely surreal to Chris, not because he doubted Marcus or their life together, but because he never imagined he would have a life that included celebration. Growing up, Weddings had always been something that happened to other people, in other worlds. He had spent so much of his life watching happiness from backstage, painting joy he could never reach. Now he was stepping into the light. The ceremony would take place at a small church in the Hudson Valley, one with faded stone walls and stained glass windows that looked like they belonged to a forgotten novel. It wasn't grand, it wasn't trendy, but it felt sacred in a quiet way, a space that welcomed stories without judgment. They printed the guest list together. Friends from the theater world, former professors, LGBTQ advocates Marcus had worked with, colleagues, neighbors, the florist who always remembered Chris's favorite colors. Only one invitation was addressed without a name, just a location. That envelope had already been sent. When Naomi, Chris's longtime friend and the maid of honor, saw him reviewing the final guest list, she paused. Her fingers brushed over the blank space where the unnamed guest might have been. Her voice broke the silence like a careful question. "If they come, what will you do?" Chris didn't look up. He closed the folder, then said, "I didn't invite them to be forgiven. I invited them to know I don't need forgiveness anymore." Naomi said nothing else. She had known Chris since college, when he was still the boy who slept with the lights on, who never accepted help carrying stage props even when his arms shook from exhaustion. She had seen him grow, but never heal out loud. And now, this moment, this invitation without a name, felt like the closest thing he had ever done to reclaiming the silence. The week before the wedding, Chris walked through the church one last time. He stood at the back pew, tracing the wood grain with his fingertips, imagining where each guest would sit. He stopped at the final row, a place marked with a small wooden sign he had hand-lettered himself. It read, "Reserved for the ones who never came back." It wasn't meant to provoke. It wasn't even meant to hurt. It was simply a boundary, a quiet truth written in ink. Chris placed it there without ceremony, then stepped back and stared at it. Not with anger, not even with sadness, just closure. The night before the ceremony, he and Marcus sat on the floor of their living room, folding napkins and tying ribbons onto the last of the favors. Chris seemed calm, not performative, not withdrawn, just present. Marcus glanced at him, then at the box of wedding bands resting nearby. "You ever wonder," Marcus asked gently, "how your past might show up tomorrow?" Chris smiled, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. "It already has," he said. The past had never really left. It had shaped him, shadowed him, sculpted every silent victory and sleepless night. But for the first time, it wasn't a weight. It was just part of the set, and tomorrow he would stand under the lights, not behind them. The morning of the wedding arrived with soft clouds and early sun streaking through the stained glass windows of the old church. It smelled faintly of aged wood and lavender from the floral arrangements Naomi had chosen. Volunteers moved in quiet rhythm, lighting candles and checking place cards, while Chris stood alone behind the altar, adjusting the boutonniere pinned to his lapel. He had rehearsed this moment, not the ceremony, but the possibility that someone unexpected might appear. He had visualized it a dozen ways: loud confrontations, tearful reunions, awkward apologies. But when the time came, it looked like none of those things. It looked like silence. The pews gradually filled with familiar faces. Theater colleagues who wore colorful scarves and perfume that lingered in the air. Old roommates from college who whispered stories from the past in a hushed laughter. Marcus's extended family, who had flown in from across the country, warm and welcoming. Chris's name was spoken with kindness. He was introduced as an artist, a friend, a partner, never as someone who had once been left behind. In that moment, he belonged. Then, as the music began, not loudly, but just enough to signal a shift in the air, the side door creaked open. Two figures appeared in the doorway. They didn't walk down the aisle. They didn't ask for permission. They didn't announce themselves. They simply entered quietly, as if stepping into someone else's memory. A woman in a soft cream coat, clutching a small bouquet with trembling fingers. A man beside her, upright, his expression unreadable. Their movements were slow, uncertain. They didn't glance around for recognition. They didn't look toward the altar. They headed to the back, to the final row, to the pew marked with a modest sign reserved for the ones who never came back. No one else in the room noticed them. Not really, but Naomi did. From her place near the front, she turned slightly, her breath catching. She leaned toward Chris, who stood at the entrance of the aisle, ready to walk forward. "Is it them?" she whispered. Chris didn't answer. He didn't need to. His eyes, sharp and steady, had already found them. He didn't cry. He didn't flinch. He simply turned his gaze back to Marcus, standing at the altar with both hands folded, waiting. Chris took one step forward, then another, and another, each one more grounded than the last. His past was now a silent audience in the back row, not clapping, not speaking, just watching. But that was all they could do. When he reached the altar, he didn't turn around. He didn't need to know whether they were crying, whether they regretted anything, whether they even understood. He had nothing left to prove. As the ceremony unfolded, soft vows spoken under the arch of hydrangeas and eucalyptus, the room felt suspended in grace. Every detail had been chosen with care. The music, the readings, the flowers, the vows. But nothing had been planned for the two people sitting in the last row. They remained still, unacknowledged by everyone except the one person they had once left behind. Chris took Marcus's hands in his, and with the calm of a man who had built himself from the dust of memory, he said his vows, not with trembling, not with spectacle, but with the weight of truth. He had survived without them, and now he would love with or without their approval. As they exchanged rings, the etched words on Chris's band caught the sunlight. Someone came back, but this time it didn't mean them. It meant Marcus. It meant Naomi. It meant the life he had built, the family he had chosen. And as the officiant declared them husbands, and the room filled with soft applause and wet eyes, Chris stood still for a moment longer. Then he looked back, just once. He saw them, sitting, silent, no applause. No smile, no words, and that was enough. The reception faded slowly, like the closing scene of a play, laughter trailing off, champagne flutes half full, flower petals scattered along the stone steps outside the church. Guests began to drift out into the early evening, hands waving, voices warm with joy. Some hugged Marcus, others clasped Chris's hands with quiet admiration. But no one mentioned the two figures in the back row. They had disappeared before the last song was played. Chris didn't ask where they went. He didn't ask if they said anything. He didn't turn to Naomi or Marcus or anyone searching for confirmation. It wasn't necessary. Their presence had already been acknowledged, not by words, but by boundaries. As twilight fell, Marcus walked ahead with his arm around his mother, guiding her gently to the waiting car. Naomi stayed behind to help gather leftover programs and favors. Chris lingered in the entrance of the church, his fingers brushing the edge of the doorway like someone touching the past before closing it. That was when Naomi noticed it. A small box left by the door, square, wrapped in brown paper, tied with string. No name, no card on top, just presents. She picked it up and turned toward Chris. "This wasn't here earlier," she said softly. Chris didn't respond. He only stared. They stepped inside, away from the breeze, and set the box on one of the wooden pews. Chris untied the string, slow and deliberate, like someone peeling away a memory. Inside was something he hadn't seen in over 2 decades. A teddy bear, small, worn, missing one glass eye. Its left leg crudely stitched. The fabric faded with age and touch. It was unmistakable. The same bear he had clutched the night his parents left him at Brookage Academy. the same one he lost during his first move to foster care. He remembered the scratchy ribbon around its neck, the way the ear was always slightly bent. For a moment, time broke open. He wasn't standing in a church. He was 10 years old again, sitting on a narrow twin bed in a strange room, trying not to cry loud enough for anyone to hear. Naomi stood beside him, silent. There were no explanations, but beneath the bear, folded carefully, lay a piece of paper, handwritten, no envelope, no heading, just a pointed key, torn from a notebook. The ink wavered in places, like the pen had been held by someone who hesitated with every stroke. Chris unfolded it. "We did something that cannot be forgiven, but you kept everything, even the pain, even your pride. We left. You survived. And somehow you turned out more whole than we ever deserved to witness. We are sorry, not because it changes anything, but because it should have never been yours to carry." From two people who no longer expect to be called mom and dad. The paper trembled slightly in his hands, not from his fingers, but from the weight of what had never been said, and now, too late, had been put into words. Naomi pressed her lips together, her eyes welling. She had known this version of Chris, the version who built walls with perfect symmetry, but she had never seen him like this. Still, unmoving, not angry, not broken, just resolved. Chris folded the note in half. Then again, he placed it gently back into the box beside the bear. He didn't speak. Naomi, through tears, finally asked, "Are you okay?" Chris looked at her, not with bitterness, not with hope, only with quiet truth. "They didn't leave that bear behind," he said. "I did. And everything they gave me, the silence, the absence, I learned how to carry it. But now they know I don't have to." He closed the box, not to forget it, but to release it. Because sometimes healing doesn't come from the apology. It comes from realizing you never needed one to begin with. 1 week after the wedding, the lights dimmed inside a small off-Broadway theater in Manhattan. The seats were nearly full. Critics, colleagues, former castmates, friends, some had flown in, some had no idea what to expect. The posters outside were cryptic, just a sketch of a gate drawn in chalk, and a single title beneath it, The Gate. No subtitle, no explanation, and no cast list. Chris hadn't told many people what the play was about. He hadn't shared a synopsis, hadn't granted interviews. Marcus had read the script once, then quietly placed it back on the table and kissed Chris's forehead. "I hope they're ready for this," he had whispered. The curtain opened to darkness. Then, a lone spotlight. A boy sat on a wooden bench next to a tall iron gate. No sound, no dialogue, only the slow ticking of a clock. His clothes were slightly oversized, a small bear by his side, one eye missing, a stitch down the leg. The story unfolded in silence for a long time. Scene after scene, the boy aged, not with makeup, but through lighting and movement. His hands became steadier, his clothes sharper. The bear remained on stage, always present, always untouched. Then came the final scene. A man stood in front of the same gate, not broken, not angry, just still. Behind him, light spilled through a doorway. The same place he had once waited at for someone to return. And then, with no music, no applause, he picked up the bear and walked off stage. Through the light, through the door, without turning back, the audience stood. No one clapped right away. For a moment they just watched the empty stage, as if unsure whether it was truly over. Then applause erupted, slow, then louder. Then rising to its feet, in the back of the theater, two guests slipped out quietly. They didn't stop to greet anyone. They didn't leave a note. They disappeared into the New York night like the ghosts they had always been. Chris stood in the wings, hidden from view, listening. He didn't bow. He didn't speak. Instead, he walked to the dressing room, opened a drawer, and placed the bear inside for the last time. Marcus found him minutes later. Chris looked up, calm, grounded. He simply said, "Now I can close that gate for good." There was no need for more, because sometimes the most powerful act of healing is to show the world what they tried to bury, not with vengeance, but with beauty, and sometimes to finally let it go. Have you ever wished someone would see what they left behind in you and realize you didn't need them to grow? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to Heartstorie for more stories like this one. Your pain has power. Your story has a stage.